Good morning to everyone present here. I cordially welcome you all to TechBharat 2021, Empowering EduTech and HealthTech. TechBharat is an initiative of Lagu Udyog Bharati, Karnataka, and IMS Foundation. TechBharat is envisioned as a platform to support startups and SMEs and be a guiding light to them in navigating their entrepreneurial journey. We thank the Government of Karnataka and Government of India in supporting and encouraging our vision. We welcome you to this session on leveraging technology to transform healthcare. Making healthcare innovative in its affordability and accessibility is the biggest challenge the world continues to face. This challenge is coupled with challenges in access to information and technology, improvement in healthcare policies, and reorganizing healthcare delivery systems to address basic aspects like cleanliness and hygiene in achieving universal health coverage. What role does technology play in achieving this? How can India continue to leverage technology to transform the healthcare landscape in the country? To discuss this more, we have an eminent panel with us today. First, I would like to introduce Dr. Shiv Shankar Heyo Nagaraj, Senior Research Fellow at Queensland University, Australia, who would be moderating this session too. His overall focus is on development and application of bioinformatics and approaches that utilize large amounts of data to solve problems in cancer biology. He actively collaborates with a number of Australian and international researchers, which includes clinicians as well as industry partners. Over the last 10 years, he has been a part of an exciting phase in computational biology and has worked on research problems involving genomics, proteomics, and bioinformatics. We thank you for accepting our invitation and welcome you to this session. I now request Dr. Shiv Shankar to take over the session and moderate it. Over to you, Dr. Shiv.
Thank you, Vishu. Hello, everyone. It's indeed a privilege to moderate such a terrific and diverse international panel today. And first of all, I welcome all the panelists. It was last-minute invitation of sorts, and I really appreciate everyone's time and your contribution to this. So there is a very unique panel here, I believe. And although most of you work in industry, I tend to think that they are academic at heart. So we have a young CEO of a successful startup company in Australia who is actually also an advisor to PhD students, and someone who contributed to nearly 95 patents, but was an academic before at Stanford. And the guy who spun out two successful companies still continues to do experiments in the lab. So it's very interesting that this particular panel, all of you continue to be interested in some form of research. So what we plan to do today is we'll discuss on how to address some of the unmet healthcare needs of patients, clinicians, healthcare facilities, and to really think about taking innovative solutions forward in the patient care. Due to the nature of this, we will address the context internationally. We will address how some of these things are applicable to Australia and USA, and more so for India. I guess all of us will make a very important contribution at the end of this discussion. And with this, the format of this particular discussion would be, I will introduce the speaker first. Speaker will talk about 5 to 8 minutes or so about opening remarks. They can use the slides, etc. And then I will accept Seventy, who needs to go early. We will ask her a few questions, but after that, we'll move on to the next speaker, and we'll finish all the opening remarks, and then we come back to the individual questions to all the speakers, if that's okay. All right. So it's indeed my pleasure to introduce Dr. Sevanthi Limai in this panel. So she's a consultant medical oncologist. She is the director of clinical and translational oncology of research. She's also the director of precision oncology at Kokilaben Dhirubhai Ambani Hospital in Mumbai. Before moving back to India, she was an ex-consultant at Dana-Farber Cancer Institute at Harvard Medical School and also at Columbia Medical Center. So her Seventh's expertise is in treating patients with solid tumors, including head and neck, lung, breast, and other sarcomas. So what I have found about Seventh is she's very futuristic. She uses actively genomics and other cutting edge technologies. And I have heard Seventh in some of the conferences, and she's really managing excellently the patient care and some of the clinical trials and how to move forward in the era of genomics. So I will hand over the session to Seventy. Seventy, over to you.
Thank you, Shiv. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be participating in this technology-driven session. And one of the biggest attractions here was to be able to meet all these leaders in their own field, and as well as have this very interesting interaction with yourself on a topic that is thriving in today's world. And when just as an extension to your introduction, I identify myself as a clinician investigator, and all my life I have been that, which just means that you try to bring in all the translational work that you all do in your labs into clinic, and essentially help design studies to get more answers for our cancer patients. In saying that, I have a very quick presentation to share, and it'll just take you through the concept that I have of how cancer is practiced in India today or in the world, and what kind of newer things are we seeing. In that, I think all of you all are very privy to the stuff that we actually see around in the innovations in cancer care. But just to enlighten some of our listeners, mortality in cancer care has gone down. We all know that, not enough, but definitely down in the last 2 decades. Survivorship is definitely up. I feel that it is all multimodality advances. I think there is no other way to practice oncology rather than being precise. And so we have seen this happening in surgery, we have seen this happening in radiation. We've also seen this happening in the medical oncology field, wherein earlier it was just chemotherapy. Now there is much more than that. And what we call precision medicine, which thrives every place other than oncology, including oncology as well, is all driven by the genomic data that we mine through patients. You have germline, you have somatic, and then you have the design of personalized care. And as a treating clinician, I firmly believe that there is no other way to treat cancer than personalizing the care, than to figure out which will work best for which patient. And when we look back, it all started with targeted therapy and how you had to find a particular mutation. In this case, Nikhil Wagle from Dana-Farber Cancer Center has written this article wherein a case report wherein BRAF inhibitors work in this BRAF positive melanoma patient and leads to complete remission for this patient. When you find immune cells and you harness them to fight the cancer, you have the advent of immunotherapy. And in the last 2 decades, we have seen immunotherapy really transforming cancer care, so much so that earlier we talked about only melanoma and then lung cancer. And now you can just see in the slide, it's illustrative that immunotherapy has actually penetrated each cancer. It's just another modality to treat different cancers, including all solid tumors, several liquid tumors. And what is really on the horizon now is personalized vaccines. When we talk about HPV vaccine, this is one of the very core things that I have really grown up with. There's a vaccine in development, and it'll come to prevent cervix cancer, it'll come to prevent head and neck cancer. But now you hear about personalized vaccines for every cancer, including all of the solid tumors. And I'm really waiting for these trials to happen, more results to come through. And not just that, immunotherapy beyond the immunotherapy checkpoints. So we have 6 drugs in immunotherapy. I implement them, I run clinical trials, or prescribe them for patients. They are already in the market. But then what else is beyond the routine checkpoint inhibitors? And with that, I think all of us are waiting for the CAR T cells to really arrive in the solid tumor arena as well. We have many more therapies that are happening. A combination of all of these that are presented on this slide are also being tested. When I say tested, they are mostly in clinical trials. So can we do the trials differently? Because if you look at the original way of studying, it's actually 10 years to a drug development. World has moved away from that. We believe in N of 1 studies, and that's where the concept of umbrella and the basket trials have come through. But more so than that, I truly believe that the trials will have to accommodate each patient at a time. And why do we need to do that? Because each patient is different, each patient's genomics are different, and we all know that cancer is a transforming disease. It transforms, it adapts. So if you're just treating with one size fits all and you're not improvising yourself, longitudinally speaking, then you will really fall short. We will really fall short of the right kind of therapy. That's where I feel that aggregating all the information and putting it together in cancer care is really central, core and center to the kind of therapy we do. This is my last slide. And what I intend to convey to the team as a treating clinician who's working on ground, interfacing with patients, delivering whatever you do in the lab to the patient, I see the impact of all of this up close and personal. Each patient that I help put the disease in remission, and 2/3 of my patients are with advanced disease, it's a joy that I share every minute with the patient. But each patient that I end up losing, and all the worry that I carry with me for each patient's therapy and how the disease is transforming and how will I treat them the next day, it's actually very intimidating. And that's where I turn to technology, I turn to the tests that we perform in the labs. And I always say this to my patients when I'm encouraging them to do broad panel sequencing, I'm encouraging them to get my next TMB. I convey this, that I'm only as smart as the test is. And that's a submission to the team here, and really look forward to some higher innovations with the kind of leadership that we have in India and the world today. I am hopeful. Thank you, Shiv. Thank you for this opportunity. And that's all I had to say for how I practice my trick in my clinic.
That was fantastic, Sevanthi, and such a champion you are in a place where you have the ability to bring genomics with other technologies. And so, Sevanthi, how much time do you have? So, because I have just a couple of questions that before I start, is there any question from anyone to Sevanthi? So, Derek, I already see a lot of synergy between what we do here and what Sevanthi does. Do you have any questions on immunotherapy or anything else?
No, I really enjoyed that talk there, and I think one of the massive advantages you have in India over Australia is the sheer number of patients that you can gain data from, and it's only when you have that power of the data and you can analyze that data on patient responses, outcomes, etc., that you're going to make big inroads into how we treat patients globally.
So I also see a very important connection here between Elliot and Sevanthi, because Elliot is a CEO of a company called Maxwell Plus, and they have developed a very successful app and technology for early detection. So Sevanthi, I will connect you to Elliot, through emails, etc. So maybe there is because for Elliot, the hospital that Sevanthi is probably one of the most resourceful hospital in India, if I may say so, Sevanthi. So I think it would be a great starting point to see whether any of this can be done. And for Rohit, I think I'm not sure whether Rohit knows Sevanthi already, but it's just it's almost like a natural lock and key type of thing, because Rohit is after a lot of data. He is a chief AI officer at a company called Buddhimed. And then you are on the other side generating all this data, the hospital data, the clinical trials of so many different drugs at different stages. So I just think that just among all of us, there is a tremendous synergy. And we can perhaps take that offline after the conversation. So Sevanti, before you leave, I just have one question. This is, there are a set of questions that will be documented and it will eventually go to the ministers in India. So as technology in healthcare is taking a full swing, how do you see the patient journey change in coming days as a clinician?
So I feel it's a guiding light. Technology is a guiding light. Technology is what brings in newer options for patients. The same patients, so I'm talking purely from an India perspective. The same patients that we were treating with a particular style of care, mostly standard of care chemotherapy, the same patient population has a different outreach today in the COVID era. I'm doing consultations that are virtual throughout the country, even beyond the country. I feel that is the power of technology, that a person sitting in Raipur, that a person sitting in Guwahati, that a person sitting in Bhubaneswar, Orissa is able to talk to me in the next 15 minutes as a consultation. So I may have 10 patients, and every 15 minutes, these patients may be coming from different part of the country. So I feel as a senior clinician, the kind of impact I can bring with the help of technology, I am not only in Mumbai, I'm every place. So this is such an empowering thing that I feel. I started a precision clinic, one of the first in the country, on 1st September. By December 1st, we had seen 100 patients. And I only do precision twice a week. So I think, and all these patients were not just from Mumbai. These were all patients all across India. And that I feel is the power of technology, because you have certain expertise. But how do you part with your expertise? How do you disseminate that? How do you put insights into the minds of, let's say, an oncologist in the tier 2 city who does not, or tier 3 city who does not have this kind of information? The kind of genomics that we are practicing, the trials that we have, how do you disseminate that information? I think technology today is ever powering. We saw the transformation happening every place, including healthcare. And my style of practicing cancer therapy in India transformed during this last 1 year, where I feel very empowered to be able to touch lives in deep tier 2, tier 3 platforms, which I never could because I couldn't travel as much. There are only so many cities that you can travel to at one time.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's great to know. These numbers, as well as the ability to really reach out to tier 3 and 2 and 3 cities is great, because we have somewhat similar challenge here in Australia as well, where we almost have something called a rural doctor service or something, where a plane goes to this rural area and picks the patient up. So telemedicine is really picking up well here, and the kind of apps that Maxwell Plus has developed would be of great applicability in such a context. So
that's one last point that I wanted to make.
Sure.
It's specifically applicable in oncology, I feel, because oncology is ever transforming. Oncology is a growing subject. What may be the truth and applicable 3 months back may have changed with a new drug being approved, a new approval through FDA or DCGI, and standard of care is dynamic. And that's where connecting to a tertiary care was real in the US when I was a clinician in the US, and it's real even today. And as a clinician in Mumbai, to feel empowered to connect to Patna and to connect to New York within an hour is what is very powerful. And I feel only technology can do that.
Absolutely. It's fantastic to have you here, Sivanti. And I know that nothing is more important than a COVID vaccine for all of us. And being a frontline worker, there is really no excuse for us to not let you go. So thank you so much on behalf of TechBharat and the whole panel. And I will connect the rest of the panel and Rohit and Elliot to you over an email.
Thank you. Thank you again.
Okay.
Thank you for having me, Shiv. Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye-bye. All right, so we will move on to the next speaker. So I feel great to introduce Derek. So Derek is a professor at QUT and a chief scientific officer at CARP Pharmaceuticals. He's also the scientific director of CARP. Derek runs a very big research program, and cancer and aging program that comprises of more than 50 researchers. He has founded 2 companies and more on the way. And he has the unique ability to manage academia and industry, and almost a champion of philanthropy in QUT, and really guided a lot of people on how to do things differently. Now I would like to introduce Derek. Derek, stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Shiv, and thank you for the kind introduction. Excellent. So I guess Shiv gave me a brief introduction there, and my real interest, I am a basic biologist by trade. Biophysics, molecular biology and cell biology are where I sit more comfortably, but we decided a few years ago, myself and my team, that we were going to respond to the ever-changing face of academic research, and we're going to really start to move out as entrepreneurs and start taking some of the technologies that we've developed in-house and bring them hopefully towards the clinic. And one thing I've always been a great advocate is technology, is digital technologies, and how we can use these to speed up research, become more accurate at research and more reproducible research, and really bring products to the market sooner and faster. You know, we do a lot of groundbreaking work around the world, scientists, but many of these leaps in discoveries are actually driven by new digital technologies that have come online, allowing you to do more things better. So as Shiv said, we've spun out a number of companies. The first one we spun out was a company called CARP Pharmaceuticals, which is looking after our oncology drug, and actually also has a COVID drug in there as well. The second company we spun out was CARP Vitae, and that's based on aging and anti-aging. And we really, our whole premise of our lab is that we see aging as a driver of pathologies such as cancer, dementia, osteoporosis, etc. And we're looking at interventions that we may slow down those aging pathologies and developing in the first place. And that's what CARP Vitae does. We kind of moved slightly into the area of genetic testing in pediatrics, but with Shiv, which was started quite recently, the company. And then the last company should be founded this year, and that's really our move into digital technologies ourselves, and filling a hole in the marketplace where we think things are lacking, and we can maybe transform bench research in the future. As well as them, we are a little bit of an unusual lab. We have our own charitable foundation. We have our own drug discovery unit, top left there, which you can come in and very cheaply use. We have our own coffee shop. We do contract cancer services throughout Australia and beyond. We're currently dealing with companies as far away as Japan just now. And we also launched a range of face care products with a company called Ellison Crew. So we certainly responded to the lack of grants in Australian academics, and we now bring in about $7.5 million a year into our group in funding. I just want to touch on one of the technologies. We kind of realized that it was really prohibitive for labs to do drug screening, and it wasn't the cost of the libraries. You know, you can get a library of 40,000 compounds in Australia from Compounds Australia for about $15,000. That doesn't stop you doing drug screening. The thing it stops you doing drug screening is the fact that the mechatronic systems, etc., that combine everything together cost in the millions. And to set up a proper drug discovery lab, you're probably talking approaching 14 million. And WeHi is a great example. They just set up a drug discovery unit in Australia, and it cost them $14 million to do. But we realized that we could probably do it cheaper by really taking off the shelf products and combining them into a single unit. And this is just our drug discovery unit here. It's designed to fit into any lab with a standard architecture. We can run up to about 9 instruments off this drug discovery unit. We can screen libraries up to about 80,000 compounds with version 1, but we'll hopefully be up to about 250,000 compounds with version 2 of this. And the price point is going to come in around about $350,000. And we're launching this as a commercial product later this year. So it's really our response. We're going to cut the market by a substantial amount, and it's going to be a point where really institutes around the world can install one of these robots easily and be able to do drug screening from every academic lab, rather than being restricted to a few labs around the world in industry. Where is the world? And I think digital technologies are really going to have to transform how we do everything from discovery biology and systems biology all the way through to our clinical studies. One of the biggest holdups, obviously, is drug discovery just now. But our lab, and I think the kind of culture in the world now, is moving to virtual libraries as a first screening pass to home in on your potential candidates. And we use a lot of molecular dynamics simulations, modeling, docking, quantum mechanics, etc., really to do the first pass screen. And we can screen several billion compounds in a single go using our super high performance computer clusters, and then really bring that down. But I think one area that is still a bottleneck for many labs, and I think somewhere where artificial intelligence can really make inroads, is the next step, where you go to lead optimization of drugs. So where you have artificial intelligence that guides your ability to put certain groups in, and the chemistry they can do, and whether a compound can be synthesized easily and meets certain rules and is likely to be toxic, etc. And as we see, we do move digital technologies through to genomics and into patients, and I think there's a much better, larger scope for this moving into the future. And in fact, in individual patient care, I think in the future, although IBM has suffered a few hits in that area, I think the future is that there will be a degree of artificial intelligence guiding how patients will be treated, what combination drugs, what the first, second, third line therapies, etc., are going to be, and what biomarkers are going to predict these responses. Where do we move to in the future? And I've kind of touched on it there. I'm a really big believer in molecular dynamic simulations, and where we can go there. We're up to about 2 microsecond simulations now, but we really need to combine all our capabilities in quantum mechanics as well as standard molecular dynamics to really start being able to screen molecules faster, remove this bottleneck, allow us to get smaller libraries in which we can then screen more effectively, and really drive the speed of drug development moving through. As I said, AI-based medicinal chemistry, I think, is an area that would be particular strength to India, given that India has such a powerful chemistry background as it is, and computer-based background. And really, some of the universities are turning out as superb students and future scientific leaders in these areas. And I think combining the computer technology with the chemistry is going to lead to massive advances and speed up the development pipeline. And bringing, as I touched with our robotics, if every lab in India and every lab in Australia and every lab in the US was able to afford their own drug screening robot, then drug screening of your new target would not be left to chance anymore. It would be affordable. Everyone would be able to do it, and it would be robust and drive really, rather than promising technologies being filtered out through the system. just because you can't afford to do a drug screen or there's no capacity to do drug screen. We hope to change that by bringing digital technologies, mechatronics, high throughput technologies into every lab. Another area I think is pretty important is actually using, we always think that you need robotics and digital technologies to drive massive data collections and massive experiments, but the case is it's not that. I have a firm belief that we need to bring in a lot of these digital technologies for micro throughput kind of experiments, where we want to increase robustness of data collection and that way speed up research by making everything highly reproducible and not subject to human error. You know, startups are a kind of a passion for me. Probably run out of the startups I want to do. They've taken up so much time now, but I think, you know, I think we need to teach more in our universities how we can be product driven rather than thought driven. You know, one of the most important things I've ever heard probably in my lifetime was Microsoft being asked why they didn't employ PhDs, and their response was that PhDs want perfection. Microsoft doesn't need perfection. We need a product. And I think that's probably hit home that we need to develop products and not drive for perfection, but drive for what that product can do for the consumer, and then iterate on that product. I think there's a huge scope for working between India and Australia. You know, India has particular strengths in the chemistry, medicinal chemistry, high throughput chemistry, drug manufacture, etc. And Australia has particular strength in its basic and fundamental research, driving new targets and new drug areas. And I think by combining this and with the capital which exists in both countries to really joint spin out companies, you know, we can talk about we quite often offices, we'll have offices in the US, but I think Australian companies and Indian companies could also have reciprocal offices in each country and have activities in both countries. And there's ways to use this to be tax effective. Obviously, Australia has a generous R&D tax credit that we can utilize. All my companies are virtual in nature. They don't have bricks and mortar per se in the first phase of their growth. We rely on a virtual machine where we contract out a lot of our work and don't have to spend a lot of money on equipment and premises, etc. And you know, it's something Australia doesn't do too well is the spray and pray approach, which is let's spin out everything, you know, and give it a chance. Early to failure is the best approach, and not to lose technologies. So I'm just going to quickly finish off here because I realize I'm probably going over time. And I've touched really on this, but I think combining our strengths and India's strengths in chemistry, basic biology, computer biology will have great things to come in the future. And I'll finish there. And these are just some of the people who fund us. Yeah.
Thank you, Derek. That was a great presentation, and you did touch upon pharma industry and biotech industry and how this can work together in not only two nations, but we'll talk more about R&D tax, etc. in our conversation. But as we planned, I'll move to the next speaker. And the next speaker is Dr. Elliot. So Elliot is a founder and probably one of the youngest CEOs in Australia. And he's also one of the leading voices of artificial intelligence for healthcare globally. And he has a PhD from University of Queensland in the area of biomedical engineering. And as I said before, he continues to supervise in some form many PhD students. And what I have personally found is Elliot is very academic friendly. He collaborates a lot with academia, and he's always very interested in talking to younger people. And he has created a fantastic company. We have gone there a few times. It's lovely to have you, Elliot, here. And please take over and start your presentation.
Yeah, we'll do it. Look, thanks for having me here. It's great to be here. You know, humbled to be in a conversation with so many excellent people. So I'll just switch over to my screen share here. But as alluded to, I'm Elliot. I'm the CEO and founder of a company called Maxwell Plus. If anyone's looking to keep up with what we're doing, Twitter is probably the best place. As you've said, my background is biomedical engineering. I did a PhD in MR-guided radiation therapy. So this sort of intelligent cancer treatment space is quite familiar to me. But ultimately, what led to the creation of Maxwell Plus was seeing that many of the patients that could benefit from technologies like image-guided radiation therapy were missing their window of opportunity due to a late diagnosis. So that's where Maxwell Plus came from, and I'll walk you through a little bit about what we do in the area of prostate cancer. Our vision of Maxwell Plus is that no man should die from prostate cancer. We're not in the space of preventing it in the first place. There are others working on that, but we think we can eradicate deaths from prostate cancer. And this is despite prostate cancer being an extremely common form of cancer. Here in Australia, around 1 in 6 men will be diagnosed in their lifetime. Some fraction of those will have low-risk disease, but there are still around 3,500 deaths every year in Australia and around 250,000 deaths from prostate cancer globally each year. And within the realm of prostate cancer, early detection can be the difference between life and death. The 5-year survival rate for a man diagnosed in stage 1 is currently in Australia around 98%, and those numbers are reflected generally globally. But late detection, those numbers fall to below 25%. So it's our imperative to make sure that men with high-risk disease get an early diagnosis to maximize their chance of long-term survival of prostate cancer. And the way we do that is we offer a virtual-first clinical service directly to patients, which allows those patients to sign up online and engage with Maxwell Plus doctors who utilize artificial intelligence that we've developed that helps analyze blood test results, medical imaging results from things like MRI, and guide the clinician on the appropriate next step for that patient, trying to get those with high-grade disease to a biopsy as soon as possible, and those without high-grade disease avoid as much unnecessary testing as possible. Today, we're primarily focused in the diagnostic sector, but we are doing some work and some research to move further into the prostate cancer journey to assist in treatment decision-making, as well as post-treatment care for patients to watch out for metastatic disease. So, we're in market. We're a live clinical service. We've been around for 2 years. We really saw a big takeoff in 2020 during the pandemic as more men moved to look to seek care online. We really saw a big uplift there. And important to us as a clinical service that interacts directly with patients is that the patients feel educated, they understand what's going on, and they maintain a strong sense of clinician-patient relationship despite mainly dealing with their clinician through digital technology. And what we believe is that by focusing only on prostate cancer, we can provide an extremely comprehensive service in that space and keep up to date with new advances in diagnosis, eventually treatment, and really be the guiding voice on how to optimally deal with the patient with prostate cancer. And we work with clinicians all across Australia at the GP and specialist level to help be a guiding force in that process. So as I said, our vision is to reduce the 238,000 odd prostate cancer deaths through accurate, scalable early detection of prostate cancer, which is only possible through technologies like artificial intelligence, which make the data analysis process much, much faster. We do this by being with the patient from beginning to end, taking them from day one to a cure. And our focus in 2021 is to start to bring this solution further afield, start to bring it to areas outside Australia. We know that prostate cancer is a big issue in many countries, including India, and we want to see how we can get this out there. So the technology that we use and have developed is regulatory cleared in a number of different jurisdictions, and we seek to increase that and bring that out to more people as time goes on. So that's the summary of Maxwell Plus. I look forward to the panel discussion. Once again, if you're looking to get in touch, Twitter is a great way to do that. But otherwise, I will hand back to Shiv and we can keep things moving along.
That's excellent, Elliot. Thanks for introducing us the product on Maxwell Plus and really going through. So see, I have witnessed your journey from very early on to where you are, and it's just fantastic to see how all this has come along. And I have also seen some of the advertisements of patients, etc., on Maxwell Plus product, and how some patients, they never thought they may have prostate cancer, and because they contacted you, you were able to make an early detection and really sort of steer them in the treatment options, and that's when suddenly things change. But it's all really great. Happy patient, because he didn't really know that he was actually having the disease. So that's very transformative. So we'll move to the next speaker in the interest of time, and it's indeed a pleasure to introduce Rohit Gupta. I've known Rohit for many years. He is the co-founder and chief AI officer at Buddhimet Technologies. Rohit has a PhD from University of Minnesota. He's a computer scientist, and I feel great when computer scientists are working in a life science area, biology and genomics, and contributing so much to the area. So after living many years in USA after PhD, where he was working with Mayo Clinic, the Genentech, the IBM, and NASA, and when he returned, he worked on really very significant corporate sector in India, Strand and MedGenome, etc. And in every place that he worked, he oversaw a big operation, big transformation, new technologies, and automation of genomic services, etc. And recently, Rohit tells me that he works very closely with central government on digital health initiatives and programs. So this is closely with the kind of scale that we have. And he is volunteering to do this with Government of India, with lots of other folks, and this is massive. So Rohit, I welcome you to this panel, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Shiv. Thank you so much, and it's my pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me, and it's a great pleasure to be amongst all these folks and sharing some of my thoughts in AI and healthcare. So let me share my slides. So I'll start right away. I'll start by citing this very interesting opinion article from New England Journal of Medicine from 2017, which actually argues that with all the new research and papers which are coming out every single day, medical knowledge is rapidly expanding, and the complexity of medicine now really exceeds the capacity of the human mind. And this paper also argues that it is immensely clear now that algorithms and AI technology in general will not only aid the physicians in doing their job, but it is also going to slowly transform the thinking underlying medicine. And if you look on the right, there is this other independent article by this popular author Peter Norvig and his team, which also explains the power of the data. And it makes a very interesting argument that simple models on large quantities of data often beat very complicated algorithms with less data. So basically, it doesn't say that we should stop moving and doing advancements in the algorithms, but it actually makes a case that we should go out and generate more data, collect more data, and keep thinking about data empathy, which basically says that oftentimes we collect and we measure a lot of data for a very specific purpose, and it automatically introduces a lot of biases in terms of the problem that we are trying to address. When we try to apply the same data on other problems, those biases can sometimes actually, which is why these complicated models also start picking up these biases, which is why it is important to really look into data empathy as one of the core areas while we look into this AI technology to make advancements in healthcare. So we at Buddhimet Technologies are carefully merging computer science, all the AI technology, data science with modern medicine. And if you look at our founding team, as Shiv pointed out, I come from the computer science background, and the other co-founder, Dr. Bakshi, he is a neurosurgeon. He comes from a deep medicine background, and I think we both have sort of crossed this bridge of me showing interest in understanding deeper aspects of healthcare and medicine, and he's showing a lot of interest in understanding the AI technology and the algorithms. And I think that is working really nice for the company, and we have made a lot of progress. So if you really look at some of the macro trends, I was just reading this survey article from Digital Authority Partners. And it's not a surprise for the audience here. It's very clear that big data is on the rise, and if you look at the market itself, it is about a $15 billion market in the next year or so. And if you look at the type of data which is being generated in healthcare, it is going all the way from macro clinical data in healthcare settings to genomics and molecular data on the other side. So it's a really heterogeneous data, big data, which is being generated and now coming into foray in front of researchers and business users. Now with the advent of all this big data, patients obviously start demanding on-demand healthcare. Telemedicine is on the rise. Sevanti was talking about it, that within an hour she can connect with patients in Mumbai to New York, and all those things are now becoming possible with not just technology, but with also having access to such data on your mobile phones and so on and so forth. Obviously, there is a lot of advancements in AI, and prediction algorithms are improving day by day, and that also if this survey, if you look at this particular survey, 85% people actually believe that in the next already it's happening, but AI is going to play a very important role in various aspects of healthcare, not just predictions, but even healthcare delivery and stuff like that. We are also seeing over the last few years that applications like augmented reality, virtual reality are also getting traction, and especially from in aspects like doctors training, in aspects like pain management. These technologies are also playing a very important role. Medical devices is becoming a commonplace. Wearables, all of us wear some watch, something to measure wellness data, to measure vitals, and all of this streaming data is also fueling into the algorithms to provide better patient care, to predict adverse events before they happen, and guide the individuals and make them more aware of their health and so on and so forth. Finally, I think with Obama's act in 2009, a lot of things have changed in the US. A lot of hospitals are actually adopting EHRs. In India, if you see, that adoption is not really great, other than the top tier 1 hospitals. But I think over time, with all these digital health initiatives taking place, there is a clear trend that a lot of hospitals, a lot of small centers are also adopting some sort of electronic medical records, understanding the power of data in the future. So let's talk about, let's come to the basics. And while all this excitement is good, we are all happy about all these technologies taking place, data coming in. But do we really have big data in healthcare? And the main question is, how much of this data is actually usable? Can we use all of this data for analytics? The answer is clear no, right? If you look at the Indian perspective, particularly, I've been working now from the last 18, 20 months on Indian healthcare data, talking to various organizations, and as Shiv pointed out, also playing a volunteer role in designing and working out on some of the digital health initiatives in India. My experience has been, while in a country like India, there is a lot of data that is being generated. However, even if you look at inpatient settings like discharge summaries coming out, hospital bills coming out, which has a wealth of information on what was consumed in the hospital and what were the treatments provided. However, all of that data typically was not really in the usable form where algorithms can directly use that data and build analytics on top of it. If you look at the outpatient setting, there is millions of doctors visits happening in India. Doctors are writing clinical notes, doctors are writing prescriptions. There are several millions of lab investigation reports that are being generated on a daily basis. Most of that data, by the time that data comes to the patient, it is not really usable in the form where population level data can be used for inferences, for insights, and for building machine learning algorithms. And this is the data that typically people call dark data, which is measured, stored, but not really useful in the future for any inference perspective. So it is very clear that it's a wealth of information, and researchers as well as business users would like to deep dive into this data and actually and make use of it for a variety of problems. But there are many challenges to do that, and I'm just listing out here some of the core challenges that come with that. We all know that most of this medical data is in unstructured form, sometimes free text form, but machine readable, and sometimes it is not even machine readable. Sometimes it's only PDFs and images. Typically, that's how the insurance claims data in India comes from the hospitals. Even if there is a structured data that is typically non-standardized, either there are no specific vocabulary codes, or even if the codes are there, they are very specific to that particular EHR system, and which is why it becomes very difficult to aggregate data across hospitals. And which is why this interoperability becomes an issue. If I want to transfer, share, exchange information from one provider to other provider, that exchange becomes very difficult. The last point that I want to make here is, which is actually surprising when I started this journey, is that even for things like doctors, providers, clinics, diagnostic labs, insurance companies, policies, products, the pharmaceutical brands, there are no master registries that you can rely upon. There are a bunch of those, but there is no single source of truth. And which is why I think looking into all these challenges and then on the other side, looking into digital health, I think that there is a huge gap, and that gap needs to be filled. So what we believe is that India needs a standardized digital health platform, and which should ideally be a single source of truth, and also have APIs which can connect the patient data sitting in the federated architecture with the rest of the registries and the rest of the ecosystem data. So with that in mind, I think if you look back in August, our Prime Minister has actually announced India's digital health initiative called National Digital Health Mission. And this is in line with a lot of other countries who are also spending a lot of time and efforts and money on digital health initiatives. It's a very, I think it's in my opinion, it's a very ambitious plan that has been rolled out, and it's still in the works. It was first rolled out in union territories, and the idea is to be able to go across the nation very soon. So if you look into this plan, it actually does 2-3 very important things, or it at least plans to do 2-3 very important things. So first, it creates a unique health ID, for every individual, and that health ID, I can generate that health ID either in the hospital or I can do it online. And then that health ID would basically be my anchor for all the data, irrespective of which provider I go to. And the biggest problem in the healthcare data is non-availability of longitudinal records. And if this health ID is actually being used, then the longitudinal records can be easily created in the hands of the patient. And then the patient would be able to share their information with the proper consent with either doctors or their families, or even somebody sitting in New York, for example. So this mission, this program also makes that exchange possible. So it has built out rules and consent-driven mechanisms where patients can share their data with their provider or somebody else. Now, if you also look at one of the other aspects of digital systems on this platform, this program is also creating digital master registries of doctors as well as the hospitals. And therefore it can become, to my last point, it can become one of the single source of truth for who the doctor is, what the hospital, where the hospitals are, and how can I connect my data with each of those. The problem remains, I think the point that I want to now spend the next 2-3 minutes in this presentation is, while all of this is fine and we would be able to exchange information, a semantic healthcare information exchange is still a big challenge. Now, I can share the PDFs, I can share the images. The question is, how is the user going to consume that information and benefit from it? So that is where the data transformation and the fundamentals of all those things comes into place. So we believe that with all these challenges, there are really 3 layers of healthcare ecosystem which can come up with NDHM taking place. The first layer is the foundational infrastructure layer, the data transformation layer, the architecture layer. And the purpose of this layer is to improve data liquidity, and that the more and more healthcare data should become available for apps, for patients, and to make machine learning algorithms build on top of it. The second layer is the layer of intelligence, algorithms, analytics, and this layer is something which can have pre-trained AI models or natural language processing models, and for a very specific task in that particular entire ecosystem. And now I think all of us are aware that while AI has made a lot of advancements, it is still at a narrow level. The general AI is still quite far, which is why this layer ideally should build a lot of small capabilities and make it available through, let's say, some API layer in the end. Now, final layer is the layer of products, stakeholder engagement, healthcare platforms, or even cross-industry platforms. And this final layer would basically harness value from the first 2 layers and very quickly do prototyping and build products and build engagements and rules and marketplaces on that particular thing. All of these layers, I think, will be very, very beneficial to pretty much all stakeholders in the game. Patients would be able to understand their own health better. They would be more aware. They would be more in control with their health, with the data. Providers would be able to access the patient's longitudinal records very quickly and thereby come with the appropriate treatment. They can also, there can be also apps which can build on clinical decision support systems. Insurance payers would be able to handle your claim processing, in a much better way. And then health tech apps, obviously they are data hungry. They would be able to consume this data in a much more usable manner and provide, predictions, wellness programs, recommendations, and other type of services to patients. So I'll just take a quick deep dive, a slight deep dive into these 2-3 layers. So very quickly, I think some of the work that we are doing in Buddhimed is basically focusing a lot on foundational layer and the intelligence layer to begin with. So if you look at any hospital system, this is how the data is. It is all fragmented into different systems. The lab information system is separate, hospital information system is separate, radiology is there, and so on and so forth. The idea is to be able to extract meaningful information from here, write algorithms, go into natural language processing, go into machine learning, and be able to standardize this data, transform that into medical vocabularies, and then find a house for this data. Where are we going to store all this data, where we can aggregate information coming from various providers, various hospitals, various doctors, without asking them to change their behavior. So that is where we are adopting something called common data model. I'll just show you that in a moment. And this would allow me to basically create these longitudinal records. This is a complete pivot from a transaction focused data to longitudinal patient-centric data. And this is the OMOP model that we are using. I won't go into the details, but I think this is a very powerful data model, which is being created by a consortium in the US called Odyssey. And this consortium is been there since, I think, almost 10 years now. And they have done an amazing job in defining a data model to actually store observational data. And one of the most important aspects of this is the vocabulary. So basically no data can go into these tables unless it goes through the vocabulary, which is why, things like if doctor writes myocardial infarction, or somebody writes, cardiac arrest, or somebody writes heart attack. I think all three, in a usual database, all three would go as different entities into the database. And when you look for a cohort of patients, it would all get fragmented. Here, the advantage is all three concepts would go into vocabulary, and there is going to be a mapping done. A single code would come out, and that single code would go into and sit into the other table. So that's where the data fragmentation won't happen. And even the insights and analytics that you would do on top of this database is going to be much more interesting. Right, I'll skip this. This is a bit more details on the vocabularies. But in the last minute, I just want to talk about some of our work on actually doing some of these transformations on discharge summary. So this is a typical discharge summary that comes from the Indian hospitals, and wealth of information is stored here. However, it's not in the structured form. So doctors would talk about all the conditions that patients have. They would also talk about what conditions patients do not have. For example, they would say there are no signs of hypertension, or there is no history of asthma and stuff like that. Right? There are treatments, there are procedures captured in the discharge summary, there are medications captured in the discharge summary, there are lab test results also captured in the discharge summary. And this is a wealth of information which is going into the files without anyone pulling this out really in a automated fashion. There has been some research going on, but a lot of those algorithms are not really directly applicable to Indian discharge summaries because of the way the doctors write here, the abbreviations that are in use here, and so on and so forth. So we have actually built a full pipeline and algorithms to do that. It's a fairly complicated piece of pipeline which goes into a variety of technologies, some AI components. Just to give you an example, even abbreviations, right? So sometimes DM, for example, diabetes mellitus. T2D is type 2 diabetes. DM is also sometimes the medical degree of some doctors. So if we blindly expand DM to diabetes mellitus, we would obviously be off the track. So we have actually built micro machine learning models to look into those abbreviations, look into the surroundings of those abbreviations, and actually make a decision whether to expand into the medical term or not. So all of this actually has taken us last year. This project has taken us almost a year to build this, but what has come out of it is actually quite interesting. So if you look at the left, here is the typical discharge summary, all text and all unstructured information, and the kind of output that comes out of it is on the right. So you can see that this algorithm has been able to pull out nephritis as one of the final diagnoses, which is actually absolutely right. And then there are SNOMED codes. Then there are some information on where these codes are in the hierarchy. Then there are ICD codes which come out automatically. So it pulls out negated conditions as well separately. So for example, if you see there is something written called no loss of appetite. So loss of appetite has come up in the negations. Then there is a text here which says no history of DM, asthma, and so on and so forth. So those things have come up here as negated conditions. So this is, I think, a lot of technologies coming together in natural language processing, natural language understanding, and then machine learning and AI in general. That is making this possible. Now think about it. With all these lakhs and lakhs of discharge summaries, if we can actually pull this data out and think of rearranging all this information at a population level in knowledge graphs, in some sort of architecture, this can become a huge resource for asking a lot of interesting medical questions. And this graph would have the capability of answering back some of those questions in a statistical manner. So this is very exciting. The guiding principle that we are observing here is augmentation, not replacement. It has to be a very healthy mix of artificial and natural intelligence. And I think there are areas where human beings are amazing. We can actually, for example, we can set goals, which AI finds it very hard. We can do very quick abstraction with very limited information, while the algorithms needs a lot of data to be able to do that abstraction. On the other side, obviously, AI can process a lot of data which human beings struggle. We can only look at 2 or 3 dimensions. The algorithms can look at millions of dimensions. So I think the guiding principle here is to be able to create a healthy mix and that offers a lot of advantages that we have seen over the last couple of years. So
yeah, that was mind-boggling, Rohit, because the scale of this is going to be enormous. So my quick question was, if you went back to your original document and looked, or are you in a position to pull out all the prostate cancer patients and their information, for example, for Elliot, because you will have the guaranteed diagnosis as prostate cancer and maybe a few millions of them and their phone numbers and the hospitals and their location and all of that, and then one single SMS perhaps to tell them that there is such an app that exists. How cool is that going to be? Is that possible?
It's amazing. Technologically, it's possible. There is obviously, the PHI information and patient consent problems. So I think from a technology perspective, if you have the clinical data, you would be able to pull out the cohort. You would be able to pull out who were the prostate cancer patients, what were the complications that they had, and where they were treated, and so on and so forth. Reaching out to them is something that, that's a different problem altogether. But from a science perspective, I think now we are reaching a stage where we can look into this gamut of unstructured and PDF files and create these databases which you can query, like what you said, give me a cohort of prostate cancer. You can actually make the query even more complicated. You can say, give me the cohort of prostate cancers who are between this age and that age, who have not been treated with X, Y, and Z, who have only been treated with these kind of. So I think you can make the inclusion and exclusion criteria as complicated as you want. And the purpose of this system is to be able to give you, that information. The moment you have this structured data, then I think it becomes a simpler problem. It becomes a simple query problem.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. At the very least, it is quite possible to simply understand the scale of prostate cancer in India from your data, right? To make a decision on whether someone like Maxwell Plus is intending to get into a country for expanding business, etc. So that was great. So in the interest of time, I think we'll move to the next speaker. So great pleasure to introduce Ravi Narasimhan. So Ravi is currently at the R&D division of Google Health in California. So he has a PhD from Stanford University. He spent a few years in academia as assistant professor at UCSC. After that, he became a VP of R&D in a biosensor technology in California, and then he was then heading the division of Apple R&D. So I met Ravi a few years ago when he was at Verily, and he has 57 publications and an inventor. He has contributed to 95 patents, so that's extraordinary. And when I met Ravi, I also read his paper. He works on wearables. I think he brings a very different perspective and a dimension to this discussion that is going on. Ravi, on to you.
So thank you very much, Shiv, and thanks very much for the invitation to participate in this panel. It's a great honor to participate among the guests here. So what I would like to talk about today is low-cost mobile health devices for telemedicine. As previous speakers have noted, telemedicine has greatly advanced, especially in the last year due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And the outreach that is possible where a doctor can be in one city and treat patients in another city via telemedicine is definitely a great advantage, especially for access to healthcare, which may not be available in smaller or rural areas, smaller cities or rural areas. However, we think that having the video consultation with the doctor is definitely a very good and very effective way to treat patients remotely. We also think that if we can supplement that video consultation with some health data, like vital signs, for example, or some other relevant health data in a very convenient and low-cost manner, that would potentially increase the value of telemedicine visit. So, in the sense that there are some conditions where the doctor might want to do some sort of examination whether to decide should the person go to the nearest hospital for some immediate treatment, or is it something that can be managed at home. So in addition to video, if we can provide some health data through some low-cost peripherals that can be connected to a mobile phone, for example, then that could help avoid unnecessary visits to healthcare facilities in the remote location. So with that context, I would like to now talk about a project that we did when I was at Verily, which is a sister company of Google, regarding low-cost mobile health device. So this is in particular looking at blood pressure monitoring for hypertension management. So the motivation for this work is that hypertension is a leading cause of mortality worldwide, and in fact, in the United States, just a few years ago, about 50% of adults have hypertension, as defined by the latest guidelines in medical societies. So it's a high prevalence condition, and hypertension has various risk factors associated with it. In principle, measuring, treating or managing hypertension is actually fairly straightforward in principle. It involves proper diet and lifestyle, and if required, some medications to control the blood pressure, and more importantly is regular monitoring of the blood pressure. In fact, it's well known that the clinic blood pressure that is often measured during office visits at a clinic, medical clinic or hospital can be significantly different from the blood pressure measured at home in natural settings due to various factors such as white coat syndrome, etc. So regular blood pressure monitoring is definitely a key to keeping blood pressure under control. The issue, although it seems simple in practice, the issue is a question of patient compliance. So in fact, about 50% of patients do not take the medications as prescribed for various reasons, including, it is costly, the medications may be costly, or they have some side effects which the patient does not like to have, or just reminder, forgets to take the medicine. There's many reasons why medications are missed. Furthermore, in the case of blood pressure, it is the case that many people who have been diagnosed with hypertension and whose doctor recommends regular monitoring of blood pressure actually do not take blood pressure readings on a regular basis. And this also could be for several reasons, including pain experienced by the blood pressure instrument. So, a typical arm cuff squeezes the arm and occludes the artery there at the brachial artery. And that might be painful for some people. It's also quite difficult to self-administer. We have to basically wrap a cuff around the arm with one hand only and position properly. So that might be difficult for some patients, as well as there's often a concern at the end of the result. You get a number, or get two numbers, systolic and diastolic blood pressure, and the patient might wonder, is this an accurate reading? Did I do the test correctly, etc. So there is a lot of uncertainty, and they may not see the value of regular blood pressure monitoring. So in order to address this issue and potentially help telemedicine with an augmented data stream, including blood pressure and other vital signs, we would like to look into a more convenient way to measure blood pressure and encourage regular monitoring and early intervention for hypertension to prevent complications in the future. So what we decided to look into was blood pressure measurement at the finger, since it is tends to be more convenient than arm cuffs and wrist cuffs, and is also less painful. There have been attempts in the past to measure blood pressure at the finger, including a research-based method using the volume clap approach. And then there was a product several years ago that used the similar oscillometric method as an upper arm cuff to measure blood pressure at the finger. Well, these approaches have had accuracy issues, and because of that, the medical societies have not recommended finger-based blood pressure monitoring, and therefore there is a lack of adoption of these devices. In fact, the device on the right, I think, has been discontinued from the market, and the device on the left is just primarily used for research studies, and it's not a commercial product for regular patients. So what we what we investigated in this work was trying to approach the problem in a different way, using an array of sensors as well as machine learning. So what we did was, if we look at the anatomy of the finger, we see each finger has two major arteries going on each side of the finger. And if we take a cross section of the finger, we have these two arteries. And one of them, it tends to be closer to the surface of the skin than the other. At that artery, we basically match an element, a multi-element tactile pressure sensor array. So these are capacitive elements that can sense pressure by change in capacitance. So by pressing the array towards the artery, we can detect pulses from the artery and therefore estimate the blood pressure from that artery at the finger. So here what we had is a first generation prototype device. It's a lab-based system, but it gives us a proof of concept to see whether this is a feasible idea. So the actual finger wearable device is shown here, which it consists of a finger cuff, which is worn like here. And then inside the finger cuff, we have this 30 element capacitive tactile array and an air bladder, which is inflated with this pump here that presses the tactile array towards the finger and thereby can detect pulses from that digital artery. So let me quickly show a short video to explain how this prototype works in action. So we inflate the bladder. And as you can see, as we inflate the bladder, the pressure on the tactile elements increases. So there are 30 traces, one per tactile element. And then we let the air slowly leak out of the bladder. And eventually we start to see pulses on multiple elements of the array, initially small, then increase in amplitude, pulse amplitude, and then go away. So all of this information is used in a machine learning model to basically estimate the blood pressure. So as you saw in that video, this is a sort of trace that you would get in a typical measurement. You have many tactile elements, in this case 30, and you have pulse amplitude that increases and then decreases on many of these elements, as well as the total average applied pressure, as can be viewed by the low pass version of these traces. All of this information can be used to estimate blood pressure. So we did a clinical study to see the proof of concept of this prototype. So we had 97 subjects, and we partitioned the study population into a training population for training the machine learning algorithm, a validation population to tune the hyperparameters in the algorithm, and then a final test set to evaluate the performance of the algorithm. So in high level, we basically have some pre-processing steps from the waveforms that we measure from the tactile sensors, some feature extraction, and then blood pressure estimation via a regularized linear regression approach. In the interest of time, I will skip over some of the details, but happy to discuss later if there is time. But eventually come to the results section, which is we have on the test data set, the first row is that finger wearable device. We have the performance in terms of systolic blood pressure, the mean error with respect to manual auscultation with using a brachial cuff, systolic standard deviation error, similarly for diastolic mean error and standard deviation error. And what we have on the second row is the ISO standard, which is used by regulatory authorities to clear blood pressure devices for market use. And we see good initial performance compared to the standard for this finger wearable device. However, the sample size was smaller than what the standard requires. So the next step that we are working on is, first of all, miniaturizing the device so that it's more of a true wearables, like a ring, like a small wearable ring with a Bluetooth connection to a smartphone. And then also we will go to further clinical studies with larger sample size to further prove the technology. And the ultimate goal is to make this a low cost peripheral for a mobile phone, for telemedicine, for remote monitoring, or community health worker type applications. And we are actually quite interested in collaborating with organizations in India to develop this technology further and eventually deploy in these various settings. So thank you.
Excellent, Ravi. Thank you so much. I think it is so important to develop these variables moving forward in telemedicine. And we have seen a significant rise in telemedicine in Australia as well. And I get to see this particularly as I work in the indigenous health space. There is a lot of there is a lot of demand for specialist care, etc. So it's great to uh, we can talk more about, I have some questions for you, Ravi. So, in the interest of time, or what I will try to reduce, or I'll try to be quick on what I want to talk today, please. So my area of research, historically has been genomics and proteomics and generating molecular data. And with time, I have seen significant dynamic changes in the area. And the clinical genomics and EI is what I want to talk about today, and provide some comments and thoughts on whether the clinical genomics is ready for AI. Is the question that all of us are asking, and some of the things that Rohit talked about in his dark data, that I think it's a very important term. So how much dark data do we have in the genomic space? So before we go there, just a brief introduction to Australian investment in genomics. And we have invested enormously to our population and the scale of the country. And this has been a big push recently, close to $1 billion in through various forms and shapes. Australian Genomics Health Alliance, which is a national alliance, Bioplatforms Australia. The digital health CRC may be of interest to other panelists here, which is about $60 million, where it is transformative electronic health records, merging and integration of various imaging data, etc. With genomics. But two notable contribution or commitment is McKinsey's mission and the Genomics Health Futures mission as a part of MRFF funding opportunities, as well as how we have invested in Australia. So McKinsey's mission will screen nearly 10,000 Australian couples before they conceive or in early pregnancy. So the idea is to really capture any abnormalities early on, and then try to focus on how to prevent it, or how to inform the parents about what we're going to do about it. So with this, the deep learning is where we have seen enormous effort going to in terms of what we do. What you see here on the left is the remarkably complex system, the human system, which has 3 billion positions in terms of genome, hundreds of cell types, and millions of enzymatic and biochemical measurements. So this data has been traditionally looked at in isolation. There were individual experiments, now have moved to high throughput experiment, and now consortium style studies have allowed us to really think about this as a system and generate a lot of data in multiple different dimensions. So deep learning, in my opinion, have created a lot of new avenues to study this. One, at the fundamental level, to understand the biology better, so that we can devise better treatment options. But as Derek pointed out, there is significant development in acceleration of drug discovery. And this sort of points back to how we understand the functional aspects of the human genome and how we are able to convert this into better drugs. And what you see here on the right is really to this particular conversation, how are we going to actually leverage this to address the unmet healthcare needs? Can we generate, or can we create cost-effective genetic diagnostics, because our capacity to analyze genomic data and to get to the causal mutation or the disease-causing agents can be so rapid and accurate. Secondly, I see a big push in the personalized medicine where other data of an individual can be integrated into genomic data. So I'm going to give an example of imaging very shortly, but the idea is to now think about how an individual can be looked at depending on the kind of disease, or even now this is applicable to the healthy individuals. So in other words, we will be able to diagnose early and predict disease-associated mutations. There are things like polygenic risk scores that also is playing an important role in this area. So finally, there is a liquid biopsy decomposition or early detection of cancer. There is a lot of work that goes on in this space. So for single cell data, there is significant data which is of high resolution data that we are generating, particularly related to the gene expression. So this combined with deep learning may lead to much improved tools and ways in which we could detect these cancer types early in the bloodstream. So in the context of India, with all the deep learning and all of the information that we have at the genomic side, are we able to then pick up a particular condition such as cardiovascular condition, which is systematically and it is very high compared to other countries, and whether we'll be able to do this on scale. This slide is really, it talks about the Indo-Australian national capabilities and how we can work together. And both countries have our own strengths, and I have pointed out a few here. So in Australia, we have very vibrant medical research environment, well thought out for many years, and there are very important contributions that has come from here. So it's a great place for fundamental medical research, and improved health outcomes is what we are already seeing due to a number of different approaches. We have state-of-the-art infrastructure, highly trained workforce. We absolutely have international reputation and leadership in some of the key areas that two countries can work together. And Maxwell Plus is probably an example. There is a lot of appetite for new technologies, new health tech startup companies, etc. And we have many clinically accredited genetic testing already. Health data analytics, as I showed before, CRC, digital health CRC is just one example, but independently, there are lots of investments. On the Indian side, we have preclinical research organizations in the form of CROs that can work closely with Australian counterparts. The clinical trials can be run simultaneously in two different countries on different aspects, and there is a rather large and diverse genetic pool of treatment naive population. So of course, India also has clinically accredited genetic testing companies, and I really want to emphasize on the availability of AI and medical and other professions, including IT. So this really sort of underscores the power of the people, the country, and how they've been trained by some of the top institutions. And this certainly can be a great point to be working with India. FDA-approved manufacturing plants, so Biocon and others are some examples. There are many FDA-approved manufacturing plants. So in terms of manufacturing, there is again a lot of opportunity for something like this to go to India, and how both countries can work. So what does this really mean for Laghu Udyog Bharati and IMS Foundation? So it's a big foundation. I think looking at this, there are many ways in which the members of these foundation can perhaps approach Australia, India, in terms of national capabilities. So very briefly, I just want to give an overview of what we do in my lab. So we work with genomics as a sort of common denominator. We work in the area of blood transfusion and cancer and indigenous health, and we try to to sort of break the barrier of where originally genomics sort of stopped in the last couple of years to now think about how to identify blood groups, for instance, using genomic data and how and whether we can bring AI. So I must tell you that blood groups is really one place where there is a lot of data. All the immunohematology labs, pathology labs. So a lot of people test blood through serology and other methods. So it's a great starting point. So we are now developing an AI system to identify blood groups accurately. RBSeq is one of the softwares that can identify the blood groups. And radiogenomics is really the other bit, which is primarily developed by my PhD student Shrey. The RBSeq is now driven by PhD students Sudhir and Simon. Here, radiogenomics is a new and emerging area. We are trying to see whether we could combine imaging data with the gene expression data, and not only gene expression but other ways of finding ways in which these two areas, the radiology and genomics, can work together. So, for instance, we have found and others have also shown that the tumor size have correlations with the gene expression. And this also has other applications in radiology where if they're missing out on some detection, then the genomic data can complement for more accurate type of detections. So AR/VR is an example that Rohit mentioned. Here, we are using AR/VR for some of the disease awareness programs. And the idea is to make it immersive so that the public awareness and how we can reach out to many people using the same medium is very important. So I just have one more slide, but probably I won't go into the details. So this is a specific example on how we are using AI in cancer genomics. We are developing deep learning models in cancer patients, and the goal here is to use this model in a number of different applications, including trying to accurately identify cancer types and subtypes, detection of cancer just merely based on the gene expression, and new therapeutic targets, for example, surface markers that can be a very, very important marker in terms of how we can combine them in both diagnostics and other applications, and finally some prognostic markers. And to be very precise, we are more focused on explainable AI. We really want to see what kind of genes are actually giving these models and results to make sure we can go back to the lab and test it and validate it. And therefore, we are spending a lot of time in converting and building models that can explain to us on how these answers are given indeed as answers through their models. So with that, I think I will stop and we'll move to discussion. So we have about 10 minutes or so for the discussion, and I will start with a couple of questions. So the first question is perhaps for Ravi, but others can also pitch in. So what will be the ideal platform for all the wearables to connect in coming years? Is it Bluetooth, cellular, or Wi-Fi? Ravi?
Thank you. That's a very good question. I think it depends on the application, but in general, I would say if you want a low cost peripheral, and if we assume that mobile phones are readily available, even if it is a low cost mobile phone, from a power consumption point of view and a cost perspective, the Bluetooth stack might be a first choice. The Wi-Fi and cellular tend to have more power consumption profile, a higher power consumption profile, and a higher cost associated. But if we view the mobile phone as the base to the outside world, and these peripherals, these wearables are kind of just connecting to a local mobile phone, that might be one approach. That being said, there are use cases where one might consider if you can directly connect to a Wi-Fi hub or directly through a cellular. But I think that those cases need to be evaluated from a cost access, power consumption type of trade-off.
Thanks for that, Ravi. So I have a question for Elliot. If we want to start a health tech startup company today, what area would to choose to focus and on why?
Yeah, I mean, that is a very interesting question. I think, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of different disease applications that one could look at. I think the advice I would give, and where I really see the future of a lot of health tech innovation, is rather than say pick a field of medicine, say radiology, and trying to go wide and solve a number of problems in one discipline, is to look at disease pathways and see where you can follow the patient longitudinally through that process and add value along the way. I think in the long term, that's where we're going to see the biggest changes to patient outcomes, is not, supplementing radiology with some additional insights, but actually taking data from the patient from day one through to, diagnosis, and adding value the whole way through.
Thanks for that, Elliot. So I have a question for Rohit. How do we believe technology will affect the design of hospital facilities in coming years? I think it's got to do with the data and how the data is being generated in hospitals. So what do you think, Rohit?
Yeah, no, I think that's an interesting question, because I think if you think about it, the entire healthcare actually stems on patient and provider relationship. See, rest of the things actually spun out of that. So if you actually use technology at the source and make sure the interaction between patient and hospital and the patient and doctor is smooth, whatever is happening, whatever discussions are happening, if you can actually store that information in a nice manner, which is exchangeable, which is usable, I think that's the area. Because right now hospitals are struggling. I mean, they are struggling with lots of volumes of patients walking in. Their core goal is not really, although they understand that data is important, the goal on a daily basis is not to be able to really think about and obstruct your patient flow. The goal is to be able to provide best possible patient care. And if the patient walks into the hospital, you do the best you can and let the patient move out of the hospital in the shortest possible time with the best possible care. So if that is the top optimization problem for the hospital to solve, sometimes the long-term problems like storing the data and bringing the technology takes the backseat. So I think if we can bring up the technology which seamlessly integrates into their system, that is the way forward. If there are technologies which require them to change their behavior, which require them to change their workflows, those are the technologies that hospitals and providers and doctors, it's a very it becomes very difficult and onerous on them to change that. So I think that's the guiding principle in my mind, to bring technologies into foray which does not require them to change fundamentally their workflows, and still be able to use the technology to the best possible way.
Sure, thanks for that, Rohit. Derek, I have a question for you. So what does and how does the future of healthcare look like for where populations are not yet tech savvy? So how do you create awareness among populations, particularly with the new things?
Well, yeah, look, I can really talk to my interest in Indigenous health, and I know you have a strong interest there as well. And I think, I think virtual reality, really using infographics and physiology simulations to explain to people at the GP level how your body works, etc., is one. But out in the field, I guess it's a lot harder, because if they're not tech savvy, then you need to have some kind of voice assistant who's going to be out there and able to help them. But yeah, I think the first step, I think a lot of countries, including Australia, need to do is to actually, speak to people in the language they understand. And I think using imagery is a very powerful way of doing that. Expecting an old person or people live in extreme remote communities and maybe haven't had full access to education to understand some of the technologies that we talk about or some of the diseases we talk about is I think a step too far for many of them. And you know, information is power, but if you don't understand the information, so I think it's our job to make that information understandable through imagery, as opposed to necessarily text and numbers.
Sure. So can I also ask that question to Elliot? Because Elliot, with the app and the technologies that you have created, do you have any challenges with its uptake in remote communities or elderly? How have you had this challenge with Maxwell Plus product?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly something that factors into our design a lot, especially usability. Prostate cancer testing tends to be an older demographic. So, making sure that our technology is accessible to those groups is certainly on our radar quite often. In terms of remote patients, we've actually seen a lot of benefit in, naturally, most men do not have prostate cancer. And for men in remote communities, what we've found is that by having the ability to skip going into a GP for an appointment and instead doing it online with the doctor, they save numerous hours of driving. And it's our goal at Maxwell Plus to be very, simple without being too simple, such that patients, despite perhaps, as you say, there are differing levels of education and health literacy, can still access the platform and get a lot out of it, wherever they are in the country. And we've gotten good feedback from users that the information we deliver is very accessible to them, despite not having specific clinical expertise in the area.
Okay, thanks for that. So we have about 2 or 3 minutes, or maybe a bit more if there is anything very sort of burning question, but can I just let all of you or some of you, if you have any questions for each other, please take a moment and see whether there is any other question. So although we are running out of time, I somehow sense that the combination, the kind of panel that we have would be it won't really stop today. It's sort of beginning, there will be new connections, there'll be new things that will be achieved from today. So any questions, Rohit or Ravi?
No, I think one point, not really a question, a comment, Shiv, if anybody wants to comment on that. I think just by looking at this panel, although we are all talking about technology in healthcare, but there is so much diversity within healthcare. I mean, if you look at healthcare, life sciences, pharmaceuticals, I think there's a lot going on. And it is also becoming very clear that collaboration is going to be the key. Right, while all of us have some expertise and spent years together into building that expertise and having published and some so for students particularly, I think all of us are either directly or indirectly also working with junior staff, students. I think going forward in the next decade or so, in my opinion, the way we are going to collaborate is going to define some of the successes in the future. While independent successes, achievements are also going to happen, but I think for the future workforce, I believe a more efficient programs, more efficient collaboration is going to be the key. So as you said, this is the starting point, and I can see lots of ideas here where I would love to pick up later. But I think this is one theme that I want to just float and see if anybody wants to pitch in and talk about it.
Absolutely. I cannot agree more. Derek or Ravi, you want to? Ravi, how does Google think about all this? You are on, you have so much resource, right? How do you think? How do you pick up the problems that you want to work on at R&D?
So that's a good question. Actually, there are many tracks. What I have presented today is just some of what I have been working on. But at Google, there is a lot of emphasis now at Google Health on using AI, as of course, to derive insights from electronic health records and and other sorts of health information. And also, you might have seen recently during the COVID pandemic, even the search, Google search and Google Maps, they have adapted to provide useful information regarding testing sites, locations, and also the COVID screener. For example, you can take an online questionnaire that is validated by WHO and CDC in US, and to basically determine, should you go and see a doctor? Do you have symptoms related to COVID? And like that, they have done many other questionnaires for other diseases in the mental health area and such. So there is a lot of overall, as a company, Google has put significant importance to making some sort of impact in healthcare. Search is the natural starting point because that is Google's strength. Search, maps, but there are other products that they have planned in the future. So not just these kind of health devices area, but the more on the AI and software side. I guess I could make an announcement or basically a announcement that next week on 4th of February, I think Google Health in particular is planning to be more open or more kind of give some more details on some of the projects and some of the initiatives that are happening. So if others are interested, that would be one place to learn more about what Google Health is planning for.
That's excellent. So that sort of answers Rohit's question already. So it's looking for collaborations and partnerships across. So that's great to know. So Derek, what's your take on collaborations and partnership?
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole premise, I guess, of what I kind of worked towards over the last few years. You mentioned we have a team of 50 scientists and clinicians, but that kind of reflects the span and breadth of everything we do, everything from structural biology, biophysics, molecular biology, cell biology, translational biology, all the way through clinical practice. And it's only by working together in that pathway. And I think in the academic model, in some degrees, is still all driven by individual KPIs, and that drives a reluctance to have that kind of necessarily cross-disciplinary research, because who takes the golden crown at the end of that research is directly related to that person's employment at the end. So we work together across fields. We even have a mechatronics division. I would doubt there's very many biomed labs in the world have a mechatronics division, but it's all towards the same goal. And I think that's one way India and Australia could really work together and push together the synergies, the things that we're perhaps strong on, and other aspects, particularly in the translational side, where India is particularly powerful at, including medicinal chemistry and toxicology and things like that, and combining them so we have a straight pathway where we can take some fundamental ideas and drive them into products. And I think Elliot's a great example of what we should be doing. We should be spinning out companies. We should be encouraging our postdocs, our PhD students to be entrepreneurs in both countries, in Australia and India. I mean, the US is brilliant at it, but we need to lift our game to kind of meet.
Okay, so I think we'll just leave the final comments from Elliot, and we'll stop there. Elliot, what do you think? How do you partner within Maxwell Plus? I'm sure you have many partners. Can you please conclude with that comment?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll echo the previous comments and say that it's pretty essential, especially as a startup. We're often under-resourced and trying to do ambitious things. So partnerships, whether it be with other industry partners, public health system, research partners, have been essential to our growth so far. And I imagine they will be going forward as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I think we have clearly run out of time, but it was a fantastic discussion. Thank you so much for your very, very valuable time. I know time is precious, and I will be in touch with all of you and connect the panelists if you wanted to collaborate or take this forward. But I leave it there, and good night to California, good morning in India, and I think we're just going for lunch. So we'll leave it there, gentlemen, and thanks, Sevanthi. I don't think she is there, but it was a clearly insightful discussion, and we'll be in touch. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, Shiv.
See you.